loud so you can really hear me. Welcome to the Strand bookstore. We are 85 years old this past month and still independent. I'm Jessica Strand, the events coordinator, director here. And no, I'm not related to the Bass family who own the bookstore and have since the beginning. It's just a very funny coincidence. Anyway, tonight I'm thrilled to have the legendary Pete Hamill with us, a writer and journalist. He has written 22 books, and he is a true New York journalist, having written columns that capture the essence of this city for both the New York Post and the New York Daily News. Tonight, he will read from his latest novel, which is now in paperback, Tabloid City. After he reads, he'll read for about 20 minutes. We will open it up to the audience for questions, and then Pete will sign. Please join me in welcoming Pete Hamill. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming out in this Belfast weather. Come to one of the great bookstores in New York. I'm going to read from Tabloid City, which is my last book. It just came out in paperback. And it's about the last sort of 24 hours of the life of a newspaper, which I've invented, called the New York World, based on Joseph Pulitzer's famous New York World, which died during the Depression. But it's based also on what's happening to newspapers. Just a few hours ago, the Times-Picayune in New Orleans announced that it was cutting half its staff, reducing itself to paper 3 days a week, and becoming primarily a website. And we can talk about that later. But it's the same dilemma facing the imagined newspaper in this particular book. And part of it was inspired by the sense that I had that a business which I loved, that I spent so much of my life working in, with some of the most amazing people, the worst husbands, not so terrific wives, and craftsmen and craftswomen who cared about the thing they were turning out. They sure didn't do it for the money. And I hate to see that go. On the other hand, and we can talk a little about that later too, I also teach at NYU, writer in residence there, float around different classes in the journalism school. And the students themselves have made me optimistic about where we're going, because they do have a passion. They do want to work at something that, at its best, can help people who've been knocked down to get up. They can become the court of last resort for people who've been failed by the government or bureaucracy or the impenetrability of filling out forms, but who have lives that have stories. And tabloids at their best. I don't want to talk about the two current tabloids in town, but the condition they're in, but maybe I'll have to if you subpoena me. But they also tell the story of New York. They talk about people one at a time. They don't go for the great, huge abstractions. They're telling you, they're explaining the people who live here, including the new people who keep arriving all the time. And they explain the city to those new people, too, or at least to their children. this book, which has 7 or 8 characters moving through while the clock ticks towards deadline, and the clock ticks towards some other awful things. Their lives go on. There are people in it who have money. There's a woman early on in the book who uses some money actually to help people, who helps libraries, who helps students, who helps people whose lives can be changed just by a little kindness. And she dies early on in the book. She's killed. She's the woman that the editor, Sam Briscoe, who's 71, he's been with her for 15 years. They live happily apart in separate apartments, but they've been together through the best years of their lives. There's a recurring theme, too, which I find very common in New York. And that's nostalgia, by which I don't mean sentimentality. I mean the sense of loss caused by the rapidity of change in a city like this. You go away for the summer and come back and your favorite coffee shop is a hole in the ground and they're putting another Gap store in there. And by the presence, continuing presence of immigrants keep coming. If you go out to Sunset Park or parts of the Bronx and parts of East Harlem now too, you'll see what Mexicans are really doing for the city, which is making it better. Something that those of us who are children of immigrants, whether Irish, Jewish, Italian, or whatever, too often forget. That woman cleaning offices at 11 o'clock at night in some building downtown is my mother. She's the mothers, grandmothers of many of us in this room, I would bet. So their presence is in this book. And the complications I won't get into, but I'm going to open by describing, by reading a very short chapter about a woman named Helen Loomis. She's based on several women I knew when I was a kid in the newspaper business, starting in 1960. A time, by the way, when I was so happy that I wore, when I finally got a press card with my name on it, I wore it to bed for a month, living down on 2nd Avenue and 9th Street, walking distance from here. Helen Loomis is based on 2 women I knew in the business in those days. Both of them loved the title, which was a contest, always, about who was the best rewrite man in town. And the rewrite man was either Helen Loomis or another woman in the same usually. So, and she senses, when I pick her up, the part I'm reading is at 2 o'clock, 2:07 in the morning, and she lives at 2nd Avenue and 9th Street, where I used to live. And she's already done a shift at the paper and has come home. 2:07 a.m. She's been home for 30 minutes now, but after a shower and 4 cigarettes, she can't sleep. The apartment is dark, as always, and she knows it is spotless. 2 doors are closed between the bedroom and the windows that open onto 2nd Avenue, but she can still hear the usual sounds of emergency from the street, as she does every night. First, there was an ambulance siren, then heavier screams from fire engine. They fade away, heading downtown. Then a shout, followed by an answer, then another shout, like dialogue between angry seals. version of Whitman's barbaric yawl. Helen Loomis turns on her side, squashing a pillow over her head, then hears a second fire truck, wilder, more guttural, the ladder. She gets up, pulls on her robe, opens the door to the kitchen, then to the long room with its dining table and bookshelves, on into the living room. She opens the drapes a few inches, peers out into the rain-lashed heaven. Across the street, under an awning, she sees Federico the Mambo dancer. It's his time, and he is dancing. She knows he is 72, knows that his wife is dead, his 2 daughters living in Miami, 1 grandson serving in Afghanistan. He should be too old for this, but Federico surges with life. He wears a woven straw hat, a Mets jacket, polished boots with lifts. Wires feed into his ears from a machine strapped to his chest. The wires give him Tito Puente. They give him Machito. They give him El Gran Combo and Cortijo, Ruben Blades and Eddie Paglia. They give him the Palladium on Broadway in 1958. She knows because Federico has told her so. On many warm nights when she meets him while hurrying home from the world. He dances alone on the avenue with the precision and lightness of a 20-year-old. He never looks for applause. He doesn't ask for loose change. He doesn't flirt. He dances for himself. He dances to avoid going home to the apartment where the only resident is himself. He dances to ward off loneliness. Helen closes the drapes, whispering a buenas noches, Federico. She moves back through the dark apartment. She thinks about another cigarette, decides no, and returns to bed. A few minutes later, she is asleep. A few minutes after that, the telephone rings. The telephone is summoning her back to the paper after she's already done a shift because of this double homicide in Greenwich Village or Hatchet Place. And so she goes on. The word that's left for her, since she has to do a second shift, is it's all right to smoke. And she goes back down to the paper. Later in the book, Briscoe, as the editor, has been told by the FP, as they call it. The second word is publisher, so you can imagine what the F stands for. The FP has decided that without any more discussion, they're closing the newspaper, part of the newspaper, and opening up a website. He knows he can't do that. But he has to go and tell the staff. And so a meeting is scheduled that afternoon around 5 o'clock. A meeting with the full staff, a few drop-ins who used to work at the paper, who've been alerted, and he's there. He's standing with his city editor, a younger guy named Matt Logan. Briscoe knows Helen isn't coming, or said she wasn't. She'd love the aroma of this version of the city room. Christ, 14 years since I stopped cigarettes, he thinks, and I want one now. A whiskey, too. Cynthia helped me stop both. Cynthia's the woman who was murdered, and the love of her sister. Cynthia helped me stop both. There's a clear spot now, and he eases toward his office where the secretary Janet is at the door. He shrugs off his jacket while he moves. Now another voice is playing on the CD player, wherever it is. Well, since my baby left me, I found a new place to dwell. And here coming into the city room is Billy Coe. foreman of the printers, followed by a brigade of pressmen. They are all carrying bundles of newspapers. Briscoe stops, turns back into the city room. They plop the papers on a desk, cut the cords, and start handing them out. Everyone is laughing. Briscoe sees the wood, page 1 headline. Called that way because it used to be actually cut out of wood. Briscoe sees the wood and laughs out loud too, reaching for a copy. World ends, it says. And the subhead, Jews and Irish suffer most. A photo from some apocalyptic movie shows floods toppling skyscrapers. Briscoe scans smaller headlines and stack on the left, the page number shaking his head, chuckling at them all, guffawing at a few. Among the fake headlines, Mexicans demand new day of dead, page 9. Taliban Al-Qaeda thrilled, page 28. Palin applauds rapture, page 5. Two-state solution in Middle East, all die, page 14. In the lower right-hand corner, there's a box, Tomorrow, Inside Hell, by Richard Elwood, FP. The complete back page shows a slack-jawed Jared Jeffries with a basketball bouncing off his chest, and the headline, Yukon women beat Knicks by 23. Here, Briscoe guffaws. Then Billy Goat has him by the elbow, pushing him toward the pressman and the rest of the crowd, and both face the cameras, holding up the front pages with everyone else. The photographers clicking away. Even the photographers are laughing. Barney Weiss photographs the photographers from the front and from behind. They will all soon have prints and hang on walls for the rest of their lives. He goes down towards his office, trying to deal with calls and everything. Besides, he has to go back. Talks to his secretary. And talks to some people about the wake, among other things. And then hangs up the phone. He sits there gazing into the city room, which is full of rowdy laughter, people slapping fives, shaking their heads, telling lies and war stories, and doing anything to hold back tears. A few are wearing the fake page 1 on their chest, held by tape or pins. Briscoe knows what he is seeing. Awake. He notices now that some of them are wearing black armbands. Matt Logan, the city editor, is one of them. He turns and stands his reverie over. There's others, he said, including the FD. If he calls, Briscoe tells his secretary, tell him I've caught a boat from Morocco or something. Briscoe dreads going out to make a speech, but he has to say something. He remembers a guy at the old Journal American, an editor who used to stand on his desk and wave a piker ruler like a sword, urging his wards to charge the barbed wire. The paper died anyway, but while they lasted, his speeches caused great laughter in Moochie's, which was the Journal American bar. He thinks, above all, I will not stand on a desk or wave my last piker ruler. Let's go, he says. He goes to the city desk. Logan is there wearing his black armband. Briscoe glances at the windows and sees a light snow falling through the purple darkness of West Street. Then he faces the dense circle of people that has formed around the city desk. More than 200, many sipping drinks, chewing pizza, some with arms folded, others with hands jammed in pockets. Men, women, some in the rear standing on desks, photographers making pictures, some old reporters taking notes from the habit of a lifetime. Briscoe clears his throat and begins to speak. As most of you know, he says, oratory is not my thing. So in the tabloid spirit, I'll try to be short and, well, sweet. I want to thank every one of you for giving me the best years of my newspaper life. You also gave New York a newspaper that added to the city's knowledge and intelligence, and for want of a better word, its genius. Not one of us who worked here ever had to apologize for being part of the New York world. And that was not because of me, it was because of you. Journalism is a team sport, and you was a team. They applaud. Briscoe hopes they are applauding themselves, not him. Now, everything has changed, he says. I don't have to tell you why. I don't have to explain that the delivery system is changing by the hour, that the recession has killed too much advertising revenue. You know all that. But I hope every one of you gives everything to the world online, everything that you gave to the newspaper. Make it real journalism, reported, edited, where the facts are beyond dispute. He pauses and turns to Logan. In Matt Logan, you have one of the greatest editors I ever worked with, and he'll make sure that happens. They applaud some more. Wherever the hell I am, I'll be reading you. And remember to kick ass, take names. Thank you, every single one of you. Logan nods to the left to where Fonseca, the youngest reporter on the staff, just out of NYU, where Fonseca is paused before the CD player. Briscoe thinks, good, the kid made it. Then, from out of the past, from the vanished, beery walls of the Lion's Head, from other saloons, now gone, from many snowy nights when nobody went home, come the Clancy brothers, a ballad, a lament. Of all the money that e'er I had, I spent it in good company, and of all the harm I've ever done, the last was done to not me. Logan is singing hard, and so is Briscoe, and so are others who were formed by those nights on Sheridan Square when all of the Clancys were still alive. Fonseca is not singing, too young to know the words. But Briscoe sees Sheila McKibben from the Dayside copy desk, off near the windows, singing, her face dark with melancholy. Another graduate of the Lion's Head. And there, taller than some of the men, wearing a down coat that was wet on the shoulders, newly arrived, is Helen Lewis. She is smoking and singing. And all I've done for want of wit, to memory now I can't recall. So fill to me the parting glass. Good night and joy be with you all. Briscoe starts moving through the crowd, hugging every one of them, whispering his thanks. The singing goes on. He makes his way to Helen. Her eyes are mildly glassy from cold, sadness, and whiskey. It doesn't matter to Briscoe or to her. Thanks for coming, Helen, he whispers. Thanks for everything, Sam, she says. You okay? No. Neither am I, Sam said. Yeah, I can see. We'll have lunch next week. That would be great, Sam. Sloppy Louie's, okay? It's the place they used to walk over after the paper was closed at 8 a.m. Not gone. South Street Seaport, where you would sit there eating fish while the garbage men would carry huge barrels of fish heads out the front door. And it was never better next to me. Sloppy Louie's, okay? We'll have to settle for dinner soon, Sam. Briscoe hugs her again and feels her loneliness pushing into his own lonesome heart. He kisses her cheek and then starts walking to his office to retrieve memory of his jacket and coat, still singing, the wake still building. But since it falls onto my lot that I should go when you should not, I'll gently rise and softly call. Good night and joy. Logan is outside the office as Briscoe leaves. Briscoe hugs him. Sam, see you, man, he says. May the wind be always at your back. Goes on from there. I'm sure they're having it right now in New Orleans, because the announcement about the Times Picayune was moved on the wires about 4 hours ago. And I don't mean it's the end of Western civilization as we've known it or anything. But it touches me every time I hear it happen. The best people in my life that I ever met were there were a lot of other very good people. That's that rowdy crew made me want to go home to sleep so I could get up again and do it all over. So any questions that you might have, please fire away if I can help. If I can answer.
Still riding train?
Yeah, that's why I was a little late getting there. It's on the R train, which with its mysterious timetables.
Describe it well.
Yeah. No, I can't stand taxis now because you can't get anywhere. I'd rather take the subways under the traffic and have to fight it on the streets. I gave up driving about 4 years ago because I didn't trust my own reflexes at my age because of all the maniacs you keep seeing on the roads. So it's still the subway for me. I could never live in the country. I love people, and I love parts of the country. I sometimes have to go. I have a daughter who lives upstate up near Wallkill, New Paltz. And sometimes I go up, but I always take the bus and let her drive around and then pick me up. But I love the subways. Yes, sir.
Is this really, do you think this is because of the internet, this is the beginning of the end of printing newspapers in general?
No, I think they're gonna survive together for quite a while yet. It'll be like stick shift cars and automatic transmissions on the same highway for a long time. But the fact is that the cost of most newspapers, about between 60, depending on where you are, between 60 and 70% of the cost of putting out a paper goes for paper, ink, and trucks. And the internet eliminates all of that. And the internet is now, the journalism sites are beginning to professionalize. You see, by which I mean they pay the contributors. Not many of them, but the ones that I sort of check out every once in a while, every day. And they have editors, because you can't teach simple journalism in a classroom for too long. You have to have editors in the heat of the moment, showing the young how to make it better, which is what great editors always do. So I like the Daily Beast, which has reported stories in there. Unlike my friend Charlie Sennett runs a website that's been in play for a couple of years now out of Boston called Global Post, which fills the gap being left by the closing of newspaper bureaus around the world. At the very moment we need to know more about the world, we have fewer people doing the reporting, and to do it in a fact-based way, not to, go to the Middle East and rant and then come back, drop in kind of reporting. And there's some other ones, obviously. Politico is professional. I think that's the trend.
What about books? Books may be on the way out too. Books may be.
Not while this place is on. If heaven doesn't look like this, I don't want to go. I think books will last. That doesn't mean that the book business will be the same. Obviously, in some books now you're getting many more versions on Kindle or iTunes than you're actually selling books you hold in your hand. And particularly among my friends, the older crowd, people that travel a lot. It's just a lot easier than lugging 8 books off to your vacation and sit and read it online. But I think books, they're hurting right now. I'm not trying to romanticize it in any way. And I see people in the subway where there's 4 newspapers being read and about 8, book books, and everybody else is, and I don't think they're reading Madame Bovary, these things. But if you notice, if you even look that much, you see that women are reading books more than men. And I think most of the studies show that the buyers of books there are more women buying books than men. And I don't think that's going to change. I don't think it's going to go away. I don't read books, though. I have an iPad. What I'll put in there is a travel book or something if I'm heading for someplace. Because I have more books than iPad can give me. I don't need it particularly. And I like writing in the margins, schmuck kind of thing. And I can't figure out a way to do that on the Kindle, but iPad. And you can't have book signing parties unless you use a welding torch or soldering iron and stuff. But I think there's something about having it there. I always think of a book as a little house. The cover is the front door. You open it and you're in another world. And one that sometimes you recognize and sometimes you don't. And you add to it. When Ray Bradbury died last week, the way I was reading Ray Bradbury when I was young, Martian Chronicles and other books, it made me understand what it must have been like for the Dutch to sail for 4 months across the Atlantic Ocean and come to the foot of this island. The isolation of it, the sense of being cut off from a world they knew, which is the way some of the people in Bradbury's books feel. You can feel that human tale with variations. And again, the other part of it is I really believe that Robert Louis Stevenson once said that young writers should read like predators. It's food. And I think it's food for everybody. I think if you're a doctor, you're a better doctor if you've read Anna Karenina. I can't prove it. I think if you're a lawyer, you're a better lawyer if you've read Anton Chekhov. There's things that feed you into your understanding of individuals that I think you get better out of books as compared to movies. And some great movies can help, and move you that way into other lives. But it's very hard to express, except with very great actors, and it's very hard to express inner lives.
Winston Churchill once said, "You are what you read."
Yeah, well, I think that's true. I mean, and you start in very odd ways. I said the first book that I remember feeling this is something was the story of Babar. I was 5. And my mother must have been reading it to me. And then I remember reading it alone. So she must have taught me to read too. The story of that poor elephant whose mother gets shot by some dimwit, wanders off and ends up in Paris, which is, you know, why I still hate guns and love Paris. And when he got his first suit, I figured he had to be Irish. Look, he's got a green suit this elephant, you know, wandering through Paris. But I think the books that get you to read another are the ones that are the first book of text that I have all the way through without pictures was I love comics too. All the way through was Bomba the Jungle Boy at the Giant Cataract. And I still have a copy of it. And it's awful in certain ways. It's racist. It's Bomba knew he had white blood, you know, that kind of stuff. I didn't know blood was white. But it got me to, it was so well written in a classic pulp style that it got me to read to the end. And, you start with certain kinds of things and you keep moving. The feast awaits you. Here, the library, other places. I don't like the idea of kids not feeling the lives of others, of not understanding there are people who are not like them, who are very much like them. And that's what literature gives us. Every time if you read Metamorphosis the first time, it's a new book. It just came out. It just found its way to your hands. So I hope the reading habit doesn't go away. It would be poorer. I really believe it. Yes, sir.
No, I was just going to say, I've been a journalist all my life also, and I can't start the day without a paper in my hand. You know, it's just that palpable thing I have to have. I mean, I have 2 brothers, and they both are so proud of the fact that they can scan, you know, the Times in the morning. And I can't do that. I simply can't. I spent so many years in composing rooms and putting these things together. The smell of everything. And the coffee in the morning, you know, it's just something that you can't explain to other people, that you have to have it. And I'm sure you're the same way. You have to have a paper in the morning to
wherever I am.
Yeah.
I buy papers sometimes.
I always buy papers
I can't read.
Wherever I go, the first thing I do is buy the paper in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, or wherever it is, to see what it is. You know, I hope we don't lose it. I hope we don't.
And newspapers have also added to literature. Dostoevsky read a story in a paper and wrote Crime and Punishment, imagining his way into it and making it real for He's still in print, you know, from an idea he got out of the newspaper. There's many little novels that pass us by every day on the street. It's hard to find out what those tales are, but they're worth listening to. They make you more, you better, they make you a more conscious human being, I think. And it would be sad if the young just don't even bother with it. It never occurred to them to read it. That would be very sad. Or particularly if they learn to read in jail, you know, and waste 20 years of their lives. Something like that. Yes, sir.
It seems like there's a lot to lament in terms of recent trends in journalism and really in the city at large, a lot to miss, the way things used to be. Is there anything that you rejoice in terms of new trends in journalism?
Yeah, first of all, the speed. I think the speed really helps. When I went to Vietnam in '66 to cover the early part of the war, I could barely get a story out of Saigon. I would go to the AP office, and who did have somebody who could rewrite you in cablese and send it off and hope for the best. Photographs were put on a big sort of cylinder like this and moved through a cylinder. It would take 15 minutes for one photograph to go through. If you had stories that would hold a few days, basically features, in Saigon, you'd have to go out to the airport and get a pilot to take them in an envelope for some money and mail them from San Francisco. So the speed now is incredible that you can really get there, that get the material to the home office, wherever that might be. I think a lot of the younger people are better educated than we were. But if they're prisoners of the technology, they're not going to learn anything. So if good editors are helping guide them to get them out of the house, out of the building, and go out and see what's out there, I think they have the intelligence and the passion to become very good at what they're doing. So I think we're in a transitional period now. What I tell the kids up there is, at NYU, is the piano didn't write the music, Mozart did, Thelonious Monk did, Gershwin did. The technology doesn't, the machine, the mechanics of it don't do it, although it can speed it, help you. If you had to go and find what year Gershwin was born, you can go on Google and find it in a minute and a half, instead of going all the way to the paper and looking in the library through dusty cliffs. But the key to it still is what you're covering, what's out there, what the people on the third floor left thought about the shooting on the first floor right. You know, that you can go in there and find things, not only what happened, but how people talked about what happened. That is still there. And I think the journalism schools are struggling to figure out how to help younger students to understand that part of the gig, getting out. Because any good editor has to trust the reporter who's been there. You can't tell sitting in your office what really happened at the murder on 139th Street. A reporter has to get as much as is knowable at the moment about a story like that. And the same goes, I think, for more highfalutin beats, politics. And you can't listen to the flack and put it in the paper. You've got to check it out. One of the best lines of advice I ever got from an editor when I was there was some rumor that the city desk always gets tips from people, you know. Richard Nixon's up on the roof dancing naked with B.B. Raposo. Is that, yeah, what roof? But Paul Sand of the Post, my first grade editor, once said about whatever the story was that night, he said, if you want it to be true, it usually isn't. And I think it's great advice about life, about romance, about all kinds of things that can get you in trouble if you walk in with your chin up instead of down. So I hope those lessons get passed on. Yes, ma'am.
I think it's interesting that technology has changed the medium. It's also created its own kind of journalism. Because I work at pcmag.com, and can you hear me? No. I said I work at pcmag.com, and it's kind of created its own journalism because they have tons of readers, and the writers get paid so much. And I think that people aren't reading newspapers, now they're starting to read these tech magazines, and it's kind of shifting not only the medium, but journalism itself, because that's where the money is. And so people are not maybe reading newspapers anymore, but they're obsessed with these tech magazines.
Excuse me. It depends. What I'm talking about is not people who are going to sit and read online 8 or 10 hours a day. What I'm talking about is to have what newspapers have been, a broader vision of themselves, so that serendipity can take place. You go to read the story about the primary in Wisconsin or something, but you also see another story somewhere and you say, gee, I didn't know that, and start reading that. Just the way you're going into a bookstore, you go to buy one book and you see some other book that you had forgotten about, that you don't have a copy of, you buy that. Or you go to a music store and if there's any left, and you get Billie Holiday and you pick up Gustav Mahler on the way out the door. So I think the serendipity that's involved, is the role of chance as you go in to a site, is part of the attraction. And I'm waiting for more general sites that can cover politics, sports, the arts, etc., all in one place. And that's so old it might be new in a way. We're going to see. I mean, I haven't seen the site you're talking about that you work with.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting that
What?
I think it's interesting that technology has created this kind of
Well, how?
this new
I don't understand that. How did the technology?
There's so many websites now that people follow religiously just about technology that wasn't there before, and I think that it's kind of drawing people away from maybe other newspapers.
But don't you think that's too over-specialized? I mean, I don't want to read a paper that's about, how to print a paper.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of.
I want to see who won the Mets game.
Yeah. Well, the articles aren't very. I mean, the reporters don't even have to go anywhere. You just are online the whole time. So it changes reporting. Nobody leaves. Because I used to work in a newspaper too, and nobody leaves. But that's where all these graduates are getting jobs. That's where the money is.
Are they getting paid?
Really well. So well because they get.
And do they have editors?
Yes, they have
Not
editors.
for it.
But
I can't stand
it's
how people
changed the
post to
nature, I
others that
think.
don't pay.
It's changing it though.
This is not a hobby.
Yeah, they get paid really well because there's so much advertising. This technology is changing.
Well, that's good.
I think it's interesting though how it's just changing. I don't think that it will last, but this is where it is now.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
We had you bring up bookstores and talk about that related to it. So thinking about the difference between like the serendipity of a bookstore and the non-serendipity of Amazon, I think that, and this is going to be a question, I think that a lot of the problem is that the people who have created Amazon have not had experience in the book world, I would guess. So it's mostly people who have a technical background or a business background. Therefore, they don't know how to create a website that allows for serendipity. Whereas if I were to be there, having worked in the book industry for a while, if I were to be there creating the blueprint of Amazon from the beginning, I would set it up very differently, and I think that you could have a website that has most of the same benefits of a bookstore,
Yeah.
even though I like bookstores better. So do you think
There must
that
be a way to do that, because
Yeah.
the trouble with Amazon, and I order books from Barnes & Noble mainly because it's local. My wife uses Amazon. But you have to know what you're looking for.
Or you have
You know,
to
you
look
don't,
for
you
it.
don't open Amazon and say, gee, I'd like to buy a book.
Yeah.
No, you know, you don't do that. You know, and then underneath it says, readers who like this book like these books too. It's some of
Based
the
on,
worst
like, some
books in the
algorithm.
history of the world.
Yeah.
A list and under it, you feel like a putz just for ordering.
Yeah, and my question related to that is, are most of the people, if you know the answer, are most of the people who are setting up newspaper websites, are they people who are also just with a technical and business background, or has there been a lot of motion from people who are writing for the newspaper or editing for the physical newspaper?
There's not,
than
in my
the
opinion, there's not
technical?
enough interaction. Often, setting up the website, they bring in technical people who are not news people. And so they sometimes make dumb mistakes. You know, they lead with the wrong story. They lead with two bikini babes in Fort Lauderdale popping out of a bush or something. You know, you say, what is this? And miss the good stories that might be there. So, but I think, again, because some of the websites are so awful, that there's going to be greater integration. That somebody is going to say, wait a minute, this is journalism. This is not, gee whiz, Ma, you know, look what happened, you know. So I hope that, again, it's part of the transition where the speed of the technology can be slowed down a minute. It's more important to be right than to be first, because nobody's counting anymore. And hold it and make it right and make it ask 3 or 4 more questions that haven't been asked. I hope that's what happens. And particularly the way that stories are played on websites, newspaper websites in particular, where they often are different from the newspapers themselves. Or cartoon versions of the newspapers. So we'll see, we're going to see. I mean, I hope that the websites work because they can bring revenue to the newspapers and allow the young to get jobs and have as much fun as I had in my life. So we'll see. Yes, sir.
Yeah, when you ran the Post, I mean, when you edited the Post, that was when New Yorkers actually did the Post. Now, you know, it's been taken over by corporations, and I'm sure you probably have opinions about Rupert Murdoch and his News Corporation and what he's done to the Post since your days. I take it you don't think it's a particularly good influence to have non-local corporations running papers, right?
Well, I think to make certain distinctions involving Murdoch, for example, the Fleet Street formula never works here. It doesn't work. And the reason is it repels women readers. You can't have a bikini babe on page 3, on page 5, on page 9, a story of a madam or a woman that sunburns her baby or something on all those pages and expect women to take it home. And the reason you have to have women readers is that every study indicates that consumer decisions are made more by women than by men. Men might say, I want the BMW, some big thing like that. But men don't go to Macy's to buy toasters that are advertised in the paper. And if you don't have women, you're going to lose money because the advertisers can count. They might get a laugh out of some of the pages in here, but they're not going to buy advertising. In England, in Great Britain, actually, they can make money just on circulation because there's been deals there thanks to a Labour government 50 years ago where they can move stuff on trains and reduce rates and get the paper around the country and all that. And they don't have to have the kind of advertising bulk that we need here. Murdoch on the Post is last estimate I saw by somebody, he's losing $35 million a year, which means if he leaves his kids who don't even read it, I bet, will just close it. And I don't want it to close. It gave me my life. I want it to be alive. I want the Daily News to be alive. But I don't think they're moving down a road that guarantees sustained life. I'd like to hope that common sense will take over. Just as a business decision, make the paper better. I mean, if somebody came to a lot of the newspaper guys and women that I know and said, you can lose $35 million a year. You put out the best goddamn tabloid in the history of the world. It would be have great reporting. It would be full of information and laughs and coverage of things other than dead bodies. But they keep turning out a bad paper and losing $35 million a year. Maybe more. So we're going to find out fairly quickly in the next 2 or 3 years, maybe soon. Yes, ma'am?
I was just going to ask, what do you prefer writing more, nonfiction or fiction? Or do you find one easier over the other, one more difficult after doing both?
Well, I like very much like writing fiction. But the tools of reporting are so part of my character that even if I'm writing a novel, this novel, for example, I have a veteran in a wheelchair moving around Manhattan. I happen to know a guy who's been in a wheelchair for 40 years. I went to him and said, what would happen if this kid was set up theoretical possibility of the character? And he would say, he told me in an interview, he said, he would never go uptown. They don't want people in wheelchairs up there. So the cuts on the corner, the cut part of the curb that allows wheelchair people to navigate without toppling over are sometimes this high, way too high for the wheelchair. This is the way, and then I went out and looked at what he was talking about. He said, and you would never go anywhere in the rain where there's cobblestones. You slide all over them. That kind of detail that you can find out if you're writing particularly contemporary novel. The other thing I found, the fairly recent past, I wrote one novel set in 1934, North River. And among the most useful things were bound volumes of the newspapers, where you could find out from the advertising how much did a suit cost in 1934, what was playing in Lowe's State, and how much was a ticket. What was on Broadway. You can find out things just by looking at the advertising in addition to the news stories. So for writers like me and others like me, Carl Hyacin, Pete Dexter, and others who have done both, but going back to the 19th century, Mark Twain and Charles Dickens and a lot of other guys were newspaper people who also wrote fiction. I think you turn to fiction when you know a story sounds true, but you can't prove it. That's what initially got me interested in writing. And aside from reading, I had been reading fiction all my life, and particularly short stories, which taught me a lot about compression, how to get something into a very short space. But I'd go up to cover one story in East Harlem or someplace. and hanging around for the cops to finally come with something. I'd hear a better story. But it was hearsay, it was gossip. And gossip is fundamental to the good fiction. I'm sure somebody said to Cervantes, this, did you hear about this schmuck, Quixote? He's out there, trying to duel with a windmill. Everybody laughs, writes it down, but he invented the modern novel with his novel based on things he could not prove. And he had an amazing life. He had been a prisoner in a Moorish prison. But there was something more that he wanted to do. So I don't think there's it's writing, both forms of writing. But the discipline is different. Fiction is a work of the imagination. You start with facts, the checkable facts you should get right. You shouldn't have traffic moving uptown on Fifth Avenue. The checkable stuff has to be right. But it's essentially a work of the imagination. You have facts that evolve, but you have to let them marinate into memory. And not your memory, but the memory of the character that you're writing about. So they are connected, and they're not mutually exclusive. A lot of very good journalists have written very good novels. And a lot of very good journalists never even tried. A.J. Leland has no novels. And he was friends with Hamill, and he was friends with a lot of the literary novels, writers at the time. But it didn't interest him. He had a different take on the world. So I think anything that feeds you, right, being a predator, it can be fiction or non-fiction. They can feed each other in many important ways. I think the good thing also for young people who want to be journalists, that reading good fiction, particularly short fiction, can provoke questions in their heads when they're dealing with real people. If they know how a character in some short story behaved, maybe that indicates something about why X, Y, or Z happened. But they're all connected, I think. Yes, ma'am.
Just coming back to newspapers for a minute, I was just wondering, sometimes you hear the expression, well, the people have a right to know. Do you think there's ever a time when things should be held back in journalism? Something not reported?
Yeah, it's a complicated question. What's going on right now about the leaks. But I once interviewed Garcia Marquez, a great Colombian journalist. And it was also, that's a good idea. Hello? I always feel like Steve Lawrence when I about that question, because he had been a wonderful journalist when he was a kid. He was 19 and writing stuff in Colombian papers that have been collected in Spanish but never translated into English. I don't know why. And he said to me, look, everybody has a private life, a public life, and a secret life. And he said, the public life, you're fair game. If you go to the Tony Awards with Lady Gaga, you can't protest because they take your photograph. The private life is to enter someone's private life is by invitation only. You can't go climbing over the wall into his or her yard and helping yourself to whatever they do. The secret life ought to be a secret, revealed only by the person involved. Now, obviously there's lines where the secret life might be examples of hypocrisy. It might be, we've seen over and over again, the preacher who raises billions for his own pocket and has a private life that, you know, is scurrilous, and stealing money from gullible people. Politicians in particular, I think, have to be examined for contradictions and say one thing and do another. I think that's your fair game if that happens. You can't go in making politics into a moral exercise and in fact have none yourself. So there is no, I think, hard, fast rule for trying to figure it out. But I think most good reporters that I've known had certain standards. They would never put something in the paper that might hurt somebody who could not hurt them back. You know, it's one thing to deal with the President of the United States. He can hurt you back. You can call the IRS and say, check this guy, as Lyndon Johnson used to do. And Nixon, yeah. I was on the enemy's list. I would have been so ashamed if I wasn't. So there are arguments that go on, and within the craft itself, the really good people, I think, consider this. Am I going to hurt somebody beyond repair who can't hit me back? We don't do that. So today, partly because of the gadgets, you know, you can't do much. I remember being in a taxi once, driving down Fifth Avenue about 25 years ago, and I looked to my right. It was Henry Kissinger picking his nose. Today, could you imagine that? It would be Henry Kissinger picks his nose. I mean, it's not like an exciting verb in the sentence, but it would be in the paper somewhere, some paper. So, to me, there has to be lines established, particularly by the reporters themselves, and if not, by the editors who say, we're not going to do this. I mean, the editors, in the end, have to sometimes save the reporters from themselves. Yes, sir.
I was kind of lucky. Growing up reading papers, I read Gentlemen Like You, Mr. Breslin, and he used to write really impressive columns about like the murder of Queens and trial in Brooklyn, and he would write about it in such a way to tell people why it really was really important to them. He would write an in-depth background story. And I don't see that anymore in journalism. I won't get into the facts now. The victim, the perp, arrested, who done. I don't get any.
Well, there's some guys that do a good job. But that particular kind of column, the reporting-based column, for whatever reason, is not as strong in the packages that editors put together now. I don't know why. I don't think it's like they had a convention and all decided, you know, what do we need this guy for? But I think that particular kind of journalist, a columnist who's paid to have opinions, but the opinions are based on reporting. In my own case, what I always hoped I'd either get one or two reactions. One, I didn't know that. Or two, I never thought of it that way. And if you could get both in the same column, it was a double with men on base. It was what you really tried to do, but sometimes it was sheer luck. You know, you go out somewhere and you miss it. The guy's gone that you hoped you could interview. Or the guy lies I remember there's a famous Breslin story, my dear friend, and some guy in East Harlem there was a fire in some building up there, and a guy had run in and he saved a couple of kids and called the fire department and yelled the alarms and rescued a lot of people, and Jimmy interviews him up at the place. The next day they indict him for starting the fire, at which point Jimmy really did unload. I think it was off. There's a special place in hell for guys like this, that kind of thing. But because it's not clearly, rigidly defined. It's I think that's my wife. Where are you? The thunder start in 10 minutes. It's always up to, first of all, the reporter, but then the editor, to decide whether it's gone too far or it's hurting people. Because I don't know many reporters who want to hurt anyone. I really don't. And to do it willfully is like an act of malice, in my opinion. It's easier to help somebody get up. You can do it. Thank you all.